that famous scene from that fantastic movie Footloose, where Kevin Bacon and the guy play chicken with the tractors next to the river and they're driving, right? Trump is Kevin Bacon. He's not going to swerve.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Thursday, March 13th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. Guys, lots of news today, but I want to start by talking about the Democrats. Lots going on as they try to make their way back out of the political wilderness. A little bit of a setback for them yesterday when Jeanne Shaheen, senator from New Hampshire, announced she would not be running again in 2026. So let's start there, Tom. Does this make it that much harder for the Democrats to regain the Senate?
It does. I mean, they've got an open seat in Michigan that they are battling to hold on to. They've got an open seat in Minnesota that they are going to battle to hold on to. They've got incumbents, in Georgia, for example. It's going to be a tough race. And now you have New Hampshire, which is a blue-leaning state. But listen, Governor Sununu, former Governor Sununu, says he is potentially investigating a run there. If he gets in that race, that's going to be a top-tier pickup opportunity for Republicans. And again, it's 53-47. So Democrats need a net gain of 4 seats. 3 does not get the job done because J.D. Vance will break ties in the Senate. So they need a net gain of 4 seats. And they're going to be defending a lot of turf and a lot of territory. And so I think it was already sort of an uphill battle, and I think it just got a little bit tougher.
Yeah. Scott Brown, name from the past for people, from Massachusetts, is considering a run in New Hampshire as well. So, Carl, what do you make of the Senate map at this point?
Well, there was something else about Jeanne Shaheen's announcement that I thought was interesting. She's going to be 78 in January. And what she did was she showed these people what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to retire. You're not supposed to run forever. Donald Trump's 78. Joe Biden was 78 when he took office. That's too old. And I just think, it's not too old for everything. I hope I'm still golfing when I'm, in my early 80s. But I don't
shooting your age at 78, Carl.
But if you're running for office when you're 78, you have, you're going to be in office till you're in your mid 80s as a senator. And we learned from Dianne Feinstein. That's just not what we should do anymore. So I think she actually
showed. It depends. I mean, Chuck Grassley's still cooking.
I'm not criticizing Grassley. I'm just saying I thought Jeanne Shaheen showed some dignity. She kind of reminded people of how it's supposed to work. That's all.
I agree with that. Yeah, but age is different for every person.
Right. That's a little ageism from Carl Cannon there. But, sticking on the Senate, Pete Buttigieg said today he's not going to run for Senate in Michigan. That's the seat that's being vacated by Gary Peters. Yeah. So what do you think he has in mind, Tom?
Oh, gee, I don't know. Pete fancies himself in the White House for sure. Yeah. And listen, we talked about this last week or, a few shows ago. Pete Buttigieg is one of those guys. He acquitted himself well during the Democratic primary, right? I think he won Iowa, and he was legitimately in that race until everybody just kind of gave it up for Biden when they circled the wagons around him after South Carolina. But Buttigieg, now, does the Democratic Party, are they going to feel as good about him? Will he do as good of a job? Is he still as I was going to say relevant. I suspect he is relevant, but he's a good campaigner. And I think he fancies himself as someone who would be a leading contender, or at least having a halfway decent shot. I mean, you look at the folks who are out there. So that makes sense for him. And I think Democrats might be, at least Michigan Democrats are probably wishing that he might have taken the opportunity to run for Senate.
Yeah. I mean, Carl, he's a young man. He's never... Well, he ran the Department of Transportation, but he's known as Mayor Pete. Still a big leap to the White House, don't you think? Maybe a Senate seat on the way might have made some sense.
Yes, you're speaking my language. This guy thought he should be president after being mayor of South Bend, Indiana, a town with fewer than 100,000 people. Now he thinks being a widely panned transportation secretary has burnished his reputation.
Yes, still twice the size of Greenland. We should point that in terms of population, just for the record. But go ahead.
South Bend.
Yeah.
Right.
Good point. Okay, I take
Maybe
it
you
all
should run
back.
for president of Greenland then.
Yeah, I
But
noticed that the person who does have the credentials to run for president, I'm talking about the governor of the largest state in the country,
oh, here we go.
Here we go.
had Steve Bannon on his podcast yesterday, and Sonny Hostin on The View was critical of him for critical of Governor Newsom for doing that. And Sonny, with friends like Sonny Hostin, the Democrats need no enemies, and this is what he's doing. Gavin Newsom, he's not the only one. He's showing that it makes sense to talk to half the country. If you're only talking to your half of the country, you have by definition you have to thread the needle. You have to, whatever metaphor you want to use, draw for an inside straight. Gavin Newsom is trying to show himself to good advantage to the half the country that voted for Donald Trump, while simultaneously, see if there's anything he can learn, anything he can steal from the Republicans. I think it's kind of ingenious.
There was an article in the New York Times. I think it was the New York Times. It said basically, is Gavin? Oh no, it was Mark Baerback in the L.A. Times. Is Gavin Newsom talking himself to political death? I mean, listen. I think it's a good.
Baerback's a very good reporter, by the way.
I think it's a good idea for Gavin Newsom to engage with the other side. However, and you saw this in the reaction to Sonny Hostin. I mean, he could have started with, I don't know, like some moderate Republicans. He didn't have to go all the way to what liberals think Steve Bannon is like Satan, Charlie Kirk. I mean, these are hardcore conservatives. He did not ease into this thing, right? He went all the way, which I think has had, as you saw from the reaction from Sonny Hostin, has some folks on the left that are just like, what is he doing? And how could he talk to these people? So,
well, Tom, but in all seriousness, what it's, and this is one candidate, it may not everybody feel this way. They're going to have to stand up to the hardcore left of the Democratic Party if they want to win in 4 years. That's what this is. That's what, and you believe that too. So this is,
I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying, we'll see whether it was a smart strategy to go have your first couple of guests be, he could have talked to Arnold Schwarzenegger. He could have talked, former governor of California. He could have talked to, Ron DeSantis, who he debated.
Plans on doing that.
There were other big name guests available to him that would not have rankled progressives the way that these two choices obviously did.
I should book the show for him. You know who I would book? Mike Pence. That's who we should be talking to, I think.
Tom won't like that either.
Why?
Well, anyway, but speaking
I
of
don't like it. I'm just saying. I mean, Pence is, he's a big name, and he's got. They could talk about Trump.
Yeah,
that would probably, make the progressives happy if
what I'm saying. Yeah,
Newsom got Pence to talk down Trump a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think what he's doing now is better, more fun to listen to. But whether it helps him in the long run, I don't know. But I was when we were talking about Mayor Pete. I was curious about, or I saw this on Substack. This is how he said he was going to spend the next few months. He would be engaging both legacy and digital media in the service of a politics of everyday life rooted in values of freedom, blah, blah, blah. You'll be seeing me on familiar platforms and newer ones. So he's kind of they're all sort of taking a page from Real Clear Politics. They're all podcasting now, it looks like, and including Michelle Obama.
Well, I don't think her show's doing real well, but we should get Mayor Pete on our show.
I'd love to.
Imagine if we got the kind of publicity that Michelle Obama and her brother Craig Robinson got for the launch of their podcast.
Oh yeah, how's that doing?
No, I mean, look, let's give them time. Let's see where it goes. But obviously, the initial shows I think did not do well at all. The other person to mention on the Democratic side is Tim Walz, who announced that he is going to be doing a national tour of town halls in all of these GOP congressional districts around the country, which, again, following in Gavin Newsom's, he's going to go to red states and red districts and engage with voters there. And I think it's smart. We'll see how it goes. Tim Walz is, I criticized him on the show yesterday for sort of cringy comment. And, he's, I don't know how that's going to play, but we'll see. And it is clear the Democrats, at least some of them, understand that they need to reconnect and re-engage with different parts of the country that simply tuned them out and voted for Republicans last time around.
Yeah. Well, this has been a lightning round, but one more name, Carl, and that's Rahm Emanuel, who apparently is thinking about running for president. He passed on running for the DNC, but White House, why not?
But he's very well credentialed. He was a powerhouse in the House of Representatives. I first met him. He worked in the Clinton White House. He was a liaison. His first few years in the months, first year or two in the White House, he was widely disliked on Capitol Hill. And I wrote a story about him, and I said something like, even his friends say he can be caustic and, nasty or something like that. And then I was walking across Lafayette Square Park. He was behind me, and he said that even his friends say he can be nasty. I turned around, I was wrong. I said, and I didn't know what to say. So I cracked wise. I said, well, come on, Rahm. I was just being polite. I couldn't find that you have any friends. And I'll give this guy, he looked at me for a minute and he just started laughing. He said, touche. And he was the first person. The other one was the guy from Entourage, who's the character based on one of his brothers,
right,
did the same thing. But he was the first person I ever heard use the F word as an adjective, noun, and adverb in the same sentence. I won't repeat the sentence, but he was known for his profane outbursts. And he ran for mayor of Chicago. Tom got to know his work there and observed how good how good a mayor he was. Then he was ambassador. I mean, to Japan, I want to say.
Yes,
right?
Japan,
yeah.
of course.
And so he's got this wonderful resume and a lot of energy. He's got some charisma, but mostly he's one of these guys that thinks the Democrats have to move. They have to speak to the whole country. They can't just speak to the left-wing base. He gets that. And so to me, it's hard to see. I don't quite see his path to the nomination, but having him in the race, I think, would be very good for the Democrats.
Tell me on one
in
hand,
the conversation.
Not going to happen. Two
He's
words.
You don't think
Laquan McDonald, right? He covered up the shooting of an African-American teenager in Chicago who was shot 16 times by police. And it's the unforgivable sin. I mean, look, he was ambassador. That was an appointed position. I don't know that he can run for anything in Democratic politics again. And you saw this as soon as he kind of, flirted with the idea of running for the White House. It immediately came up, and a lot of folks see him as part of the, older Democratic establishment that was, part of the corrupt, folks who got Democrats into trouble in the first place. So I just don't see how he would ever get over that. I mean, I know there are second acts in American life. We talk about that all the time.
Wait. You said never going to happen. What, you mean he's not even going to run?
I'm saying he would never win.
Well, I didn't
he
say
may choose to run, but I mean, he will not.
But I'd like you to respond to this. What I said was, I think I don't see the path. It's hard for me to see the path, but I think having him in the contest would be good for the party because of some of the things he would say about the party. Do you not agree with that either?
Maybe. I mean, I'll be shocked if he decides to run because I know that he knows he's a smart guy. He's a savvy political operator. He knows what kind of baggage he's carrying and what that would mean when he gets into the race. And so, yeah, is he saying Democrats need to move to the center? Yes. Is that valuable for Democrats? Sure. I think that is valuable for them to hear, and especially from a guy like Rahm. But I just don't. Boy, he's got baggage that he just can't seem to get rid of, in my opinion.
All right, well, guys, we're going to have to take a quick break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. We're going to come back in a second. We're going to talk about some other stuff in the news. Don't go away. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by Carl Cannon and Tom Bevan. And gentlemen, the news out of Moscow, Vladimir Putin said today, Thursday, he agrees in principle with the U.S. proposal for a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine. Steve Witkoff, who just seems to be everywhere these days, will meet with Putin tonight. So, Tom, are we moving closer to a cessation of the fighting?
Publicly, we are, if you believe Putin's statements. And again, what he says openly and what he says behind closed doors could be two different things. So we will have to wait and see. But certainly on the surface, Trump has gotten the Ukrainians to say yes, and he's gotten Putin to say yes. They both said yes publicly. Now they're going to come and sit at a table, and we will see if if they're able to hammer out some sort of deal. There was stories about Putin had made these sort of maximalist demands, in advance of this. And so again, we'll see how that plays out. But yes, we're closer to peace than we've ever been. And Donald Trump and his administration have been working diligently at this and have gotten both sides to say yes to stopping the fighting. And that, I think, is progress.
Carl, are you optimistic?
Well, it's a little early for a victory lap, but
I don't think it's a victory lap, but
I think having Putin say publicly what he said put some pressure on him to not just be an obstructionist. I mean, it doesn't mean he'll have to agree to the terms or any terms, but he said, we want peace. He said that out loud to the Russian people. So there may be an opening here.
Yeah. The Russians have pushed back in Kursk, which is that's that part of Russia right on the border. They've apparently pushed the Ukrainians maybe even out. I guess they've encircled them or something. But again, it's it's sort of standard issue right before an armistice that you would be fighting really hard. So that's just something to keep an eye on. But I guess we'll know more about this tomorrow, Tom. But it is too early for a victory lap. I think Carl's right about that. But I will say it's been an interesting couple days for diplomacy, and it's been moving quicker than a lot of people thought. That I thought I didn't think we'd be here at this point.
No, but you make a good point. We saw the Ukrainians do this with their attack on Moscow, and now the Russians are trying to leverage their advantage to, so that when the ceasefire takes place, when everybody says stop and lay down that they're in the best position they could be in. So sort of counterintuitively, I guess you might say, it's a good sign that they're doing this, because it means they are getting ready to potentially stop fighting.
Yeah.
And so again, we will see if that's where this leads.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about another war, and that's the trade war. And this one does hit a little close to home. It's
this
Trump.
one's not stopping.
Yeah, Trump has
escalating.
Now threatened a 200% tariff on European alcohol, which would mean, guys, that all the wine bets on this podcast just got that much more expensive.
Well, no, Andy. Tom and I buy each other Napa Reds.
Right.
Well, I want to talk.
What about Scotch and Irish whiskey? This is, you talk about hitting close to home.
Well,
I'm
Kentucky bourbon. You got to switch to Kentucky bourbon.
I'm gonna get hold of Representative Al Green and have him hurry up with his impeachment proceedings.
Yeah. Well, I did, because I anticipated you'd say, California wines. But, the problem is that the California winemakers are likely to raise their prices as well, because they face less competition from the French and Italian winemakers. There's also a lot of inputs that go into wine, fuel, machinery, other stuff like that. So those prices may go up anyway. And anyway, the Europeans are going to retaliate, Carl. So California winemakers will be facing pressure overseas. That's the nature of a trade war. It raises all prices, not just the prices of the imported goods. There, I got my my Economics 101 out of the way.
The good news is
we did not cancel his Wall Street Journal subscription fast enough.
Listen, the good news is that Carl's wife Sharon is a wine drinker. She's very well stocked for the foreseeable future. So,
well,
high prices will not impact the Cannon household, at least in the short term.
Yeah, I guess there is something called elasticity of demand, which is very high, I think. And I'm speaking as the Walworth household as well. But, the CEO of the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, his name is Chris Swanger, and he said today, we want toasts, not tariffs. So the domestic producers aren't for this either, Carl.
No, that's right. And, look, these people don't want a trade war. Nobody in business does. Donald Trump does. And every time, and instead of the Canadians, the Europeans, instead of saying, okay, this guy's got to, be in his bonnet about this, how can we work with him? They've just sort of responded in kind. Oh, you're going to do this to us, we're going to do this to you. Well, that's not probably the most effective way to deal with Donald Trump, because then he'll say, oh, no, I'm going to really do it to you. So the escalation, the nature of this now seems almost immature to me. It almost seems like the opposite of statesmanship. It's the mirror image of what you were talking about on the Ukraine diplomacy, how delicate and tough that is. This is foreign economic policy by tantrum.
Well, Tom, are you going to be buying more California wine, you think?
Well, always buy American. That's rule number one. No, listen, Trump was just in the Oval Office earlier today, saying he's doubling down. He said, "I will not bend." This reminds me of, and I'm going to date myself here and us, but that famous scene from that fantastic movie Footloose, where Kevin Bacon and the guy play chicken with the tractors next to the river, and they're driving, right? Trump is Kevin Bacon. He's not going to swerve. He is going to keep going, and he'll risk wrecking everything because he'd rather do that than back down. And that's his attitude. That's how he's operated. And I don't see that changing. And so we'll see if other countries aren't willing to back down or change their behavior or do whatever. This could get ugly, and it could last a long time.
Yeah. All right, well,
And
guys.
Or it could end tomorrow. I mean,
Andy,
one
are
of
we
those things.
are we almost done? I need to rush out and buy some Glenmorangie and Tula.
Yeah, you better get it while you can. All right, well, guys, we are done with this segment, but there's more Real Clear Politics coming up in a moment. Don't go away.
Welcome back to the show. I'm talking now with Andrew Rotherham, expert on education. Andy worked in the Bill Clinton White House in the domestic policy shop, where he's in charge of education. He's a founder of Bellwether education think tank, and he helped us start Real Clear Education back in the day. Andy joins us from Colorado. Hey, thanks for being here today.
Hey, Carl, thanks for having me. It's great to see you.
We had a piece on our front page today by Jonathan Turley, who said that Randy Weingarten is now saying the quiet part out loud. And you and I know Randy Weingarten. She often speaks out loud. She speaks loudly, and she her default position is to shout at Republicans. But I think what Jonathan Turley is saying, he points out the ATF, her union, did not originally support the Department of Education. I think Al Shanker was running it then. And, it was the National Education Association, the more moderate of the two groups at the time, that pushed for the Department of Ed. But now she's saying that it will basically deprive, she's saying it'll deprive kids of an education. When pressed on it, she's saying, oh, well, states like Texas will, use it for vouchers. Well, I don't think that's going to disappoint Donald Trump or his administration or the people who voted for him. What do you think?
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that question. So, I mean, to start, yeah. So Randy said different things about this over the years. I mean, if you follow her, she's been on all sides of many issues over time. I think they're obviously upset about this. This is a pretty significant assault on federal authority. We could talk about that. The choice piece is, I think, an unspoken piece of this. It's unrelated to the staffing changes that we can talk about, but it is broad context for this. You now have about 22 million kids who have a right of exit out of public schools through choice programs. That number is going to go up dramatically when Texas puts its program in place, which will be one of the largest. And this is kind of a remarkable thing, Carl. Like, you've been doing this for a long time. You can remember when a 2,000 kid pilot program and people thought the sky was falling, and now you've got states just passing these statewide things on the regular. And so in Washington, you're having this conversation about the department and the layoffs and all of that. And around the country, you're having this massive unbundling of education, this rise of independent schools, micro schools, all these choice programs. And I think that's part of the collision course that is set up kind of where we are with the department. And you're exactly right. I mean, Trump has talked a big game on choice. He hasn't actually done a lot historically on choice in his first term, but he certainly talked a bigger game on it than any president before. And they're going to want to, I think the next step will be, they're going to want to start to, he even did an executive order on this, start to figure out what's the maximum extent to which federal policy can support these state choice programs. That's an important debate, and we should talk about that. That is distinct, though, from the restructuring of the department that they are doing as well. And I think, look, because choice is a little unpopular, people are going to link those two things. And I think you really have to look at them as two separate issues. You've got the restructuring of the department, and then you've also got this just increasing demand for choice that really took off after the pandemic.
All right. Well, yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the Department of Education. So this week, it sounds like they've cut the staff nearly in half at that department, at least in the Washington headquarters. They laid off 1,200 people. That is a lot of people. And,
Yes.
and I'm skeptical that all of those people were dead wood. They don't seem to know all the people they're laying off. They don't seem to know what they all did. And even if you could convince me that you could lay off 1,200 Department of Education workers, why should we think that they got the right 1,200?
Well, and they may well have gotten the wrong 1,200, because the way they're doing this is to try to stay on the right side of all these civil service rules. And so to avoid having to do targeted layoffs and the process there and so forth with the union, they're just eliminating whole offices and so forth. And so I think a real area for concern is this going to create adverse selection where they're letting all the probationary people go because they're the easiest ones to let go? But like that's your future talent. Those are your future sort of senior leaders in the department that people are going to potentially grow up to be like really serious, competent program administrators, like the ones in the past. Going after presidential management fellows, I mean, they're essentially killing their seed corn, and that's not smart. And I think they're also, look, the Powell doctrine applies here, that if you break it, you own it. And they're coming in really hard. And I mean, no disrespect to your profession, but reporters generally don't do sort of base rates on stuff. And so there's a big backup on special ed claims right now. There's problems with student loans. They now own all of that. They're not going to be able to say, hey, that was the Biden people, because they just like let go through layoffs. Some of these people took buyouts and so forth, but cumulatively they've shrunk the department by half. And so they're going to own everything that happens going forward. And you know, I think they have a plan, but I'm not sure it's a super well thought out plan for what they're trying to do.
Well, let's take the best case scenario for the Trump administration, give them benefit of the doubt for a minute. If unleashing, I mean, if you're going to cut half the staff, that sort of implies you're going to change the way the money is distributed. And what people are assuming is that, and it's been talked about in conservative circles for years, is you're going to block grant a lot of this money and you're just going to send it to the states and tell them they can do what they want with it. The best case scenario is the states will use that money wisely, test scores will go up, and people think, hey, I don't know how Trump did it, but this worked. Yeah.
Well, here's what's going to probably happen. Even if they don't get to full block grants, but they downsize, their argument is you can do the same amount of work with fewer people. And in some cases that's certainly true. Some of these offices that got let go, I think, in behind the scenes, sort of, there's always the conversation in Washington, then there's a rhetorical conversation. Behind the scenes, people are kind of like, I'm not sure anyone's going to miss some of those offices, but people are going to miss some of them. And as I said, they now own this. Their argument is you can do this with a lot less people. That's the direction they're going. I think what it's a recipe for is high variance. And we started on that with the law that President Obama signed, sort of easing up on federal accountability. This is going to like double down on a lot of that, what the Trump people want to do. And so you're going to have some states that are going to do a fantastic job. You've got some great education governors around this country, bipartisan. You've got great Democrats. You've got great Republicans. You also have some states that are really sucking wind on this issue and aren't doing a lot. And traditionally, the federal role has tried to at least like prop up and sort of put some guardrails in place. And so I think what we're probably moving towards is a period of even higher variance, where your zip code, the state you live in, is going to matter even more to the quality of education you get. And that's traditionally like what we've tried to work against. We're a country that believes in equal opportunity, not opportunity based on how much money your parents have.
Listen to Andrew Rotherham, founder of Bellwether Education, expert on education, force in education reform. He worked in Bill Clinton's White House in the domestic policy shop on this issue and helped us start Real Clear Education, and writes a lot about education. You go to his blog. Your blog is where you write EduWonk.
Eduwonk.com and
Eduwonk.com.
Eduwonk on Substack if you want to get it by newsletter.
Okay. And if you're seeing this on our podcast instead of listening on Sirius XM, you'll notice Andy's wearing a flannel shirt. Well, he's in Colorado and he joined us there. So I'm grateful he took time out. He's got a conference out there. Andy, you mentioned the states. So the attorney generals from these Democratic states have sued now. They've sued Trump. Letitia James is leading it. And of course, she says the normal things, what Trump is doing is reckless, which does not make it unconstitutional. And, New Jersey's Attorney General Matthew Platkin said, President Trump is not a king. He cannot unilaterally decide to close a cabinet agency. Well, that's right. But he's not doing that. Not yet. What he's doing is really hammering it financially, gutting it, whatever you want it, whatever.
Exactly.
Downsizing it. Does he have the authority to do that? I think he probably does. But what should the Democrats who care about education, not Democrats who only care about the teachers' unions, but Democrats who care about education, quality of education, what should be their posture in this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a really important point there. I'm not happy. I'm not happy with what they did to the Education Research Agency. I don't like a lot of this, but not liking it and it being illegal or unconstitutional are two different things. And they seem to have gotten surprisingly good at using the administrative state and using the rules and the legal aspects to actually do what they want to do. And so a lot of this, I think you can say is ill-considered. I would say it's ill-considered, but it's not necessarily illegal. And they've been fairly clever about that. I think that's getting lost in some of the rhetoric. There's going to be lawsuits on all of this. I think one thing we've seen so far is, Article 3 is doing its part, and the courts are weighing in appropriately on these things and trying to address them. So we'll see where that lawsuit goes. There's been lawsuits on other aspects. In terms of the Democrats, I think they have to acknowledge a couple of things. One is just the intense frustration. Again, when you get outside the Beltway crowd, you're hearing just a lot of people just really frustrated with how things are. There was a colleague of mine on Twitter, her name's Christina Galassi-Worrell. She's kind of an interesting education reformer out of Ohio. She was a high school dropout herself, has an interesting backstory. And she was saying yesterday, like, she doesn't think the department's been succeeding at its mission, and that she thinks taking it down to the studs like this might actually be a really good thing to unleash innovation and do things. I don't agree with her. But Democrats have got to engage with the fact that most people don't see this the way they see it, that this agency's been working really well. It's doing great things. It matters a great deal. Around most of the country, when you talk to people, this is greeted with a shrug. Parents with kids of a certain age are really frustrated about what happened with FAFSA. And so it's not an agency that had a sterling reputation. So Democrats, I think, have to, first of all, engage with that. They are not defending something that is universally popular. And the Trump people are being clever by saying, "Hey, look, we're not going to cut the funding, but we're just going to restructure."
They are. But
they don't have.
They are. Next year,
well,
yeah.
Well, look, even this year, when during Linda McMahon's confirmation hearings to be secretary, she was like, "We're not going to cut." And like, meanwhile, like just across the street, the House Budget Committee is marking up a resolution that's going to require cuts. And like, there was no like crosswalk between these two. There was no like questions on that. So yeah, of course, there's going to be pressure. And I think that's an important thing to note, Carl. This is all small beer, these discretionary domestic programs. Like the big drivers are the debt, their entitlement programs, and nobody seems to want to touch those. If Trump really wanted to lead, that's the conversation that we have to have. So they're going after this. They're claiming all these savings, but it's all pretty small beer. But the Democrats have to make an affirmative case for why do we need a federal role? I mean, the Chinese are doubling down on education right now as a competitive strategy. The Democrats should be talking about that. Here's why we need a federal role. Here's what it needs to do. We need to mend it, don't end it. They need to get out from under this pandemic shadow where they champion some really unpopular policies. They also champion some really unpopular social policies. You're seeing efforts now to pivot on that. I mean, most notably, obviously, Gavin Newsom, who's doing sort of a 180 on everything he seems to have previously believed via podcast, of course. But the Democrats are going to have to actually lean into that and reposition if they want to be champion reform. And so to be able to say, hey, the way these guys are doing it is irresponsible. It's a hatchet job and it's disrespectful to civil servants and all of that. I agree with all of that. But there needs to be then but here's our plan to also change. They can't just continue to defend the status quo. It's absolutely not working for them.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and our next guest is James Varney. He is a staff writer at Real Clear Investigations. Jim, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
So I want to talk to you about your piece today on the front page of Real Clear Politics. It's about this problem at the EPA. Tell us what the piece is about.
Well, we had written about this last October. It's they call it the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. It's something that stems from the Inflation Reduction Act. And it was $27 billion in total. $20 billion of that has been much in the news lately because it was given out to 8 nonprofits in a pretty hurried fashion in the last year of the Biden administration. And the new EPA administrator, Lee Zeldin, has been trying to claw it back. So the piece we have today just basically walks the reader through the timeline and shows how they had this compressed period of time to give out more money than the EPA had ever given out before. This was none of the nonprofits that had money like this, and neither had the EPA. So it was a very novel and kind of unorthodox process.
And the point, it sounds to me from reading the article, and I commend it to people, like I say, it's on the front page today, is that they were rushing this money out the door because they didn't want the Trump administration, if they had won, to sort of claw this money back. Is that sort of what explains the sort of rapidity with which this was done?
I think that hasn't been proven, but I think that there is a lot of people speculating that that is something that went on. When they announced the awards in April of last year, I think they were probably still pretty confident about winning. So this September 30th, which is the end of the federal fiscal year, was a deadline that they built in. But of course, April to September 30th is not a lot of time to move 20 billion when you've never done it before.
Right.
And you're giving it to these groups, which in some cases had just gotten their nonprofit status the month before they got the award, or others that had like $100 in assets, and you're giving them billions. So all of that seems like, especially once they started, after Biden dropped out, things seem to have really picked up pace.
Yeah. So part of what sort of makes this interesting, I guess, is this piece that was released by Project Veritas. It's an undercover piece of video with a guy named Brett Efron, who was identified in the Project Veritas video as a special advisor for implementation at the EPA. He was recorded undercover. I think this was in December. So just listen to this and tell me what you think.
It truly feels like we're on the Titanic. We're throwing like gold bars off the edge. It was a expense policy against Trump winning. So like these are basically like nonprofit institutions that will cover the entire country. They could have been a government agency, but because they aren't, well, we're safer from Republican system than he is.
So that's part of what animates this, and just it's a little difficult to understand everything he said, but he does say it truly feels like we are on the Titanic throwing gold bars off the top edge. It was an insurance policy against Trump winning because they aren't a government agency, meaning these nonprofits. They are safer from Republicans taking the money back. And you mentioned one of these groups, Power Forward Communities, which is Stacey Abrams is associated with it. And I'm sure you did it. I went to and looked at their 990. That's what you do when you're interested in these things. And you're right. They and people should know the 990. I always tell people about this. Any nonprofit has to file in 990 with the IRS. And you can go online. It's public record, and you can sort of see what they're up to. So when we were talking about this before, a little while ago on the show, I went and looked, and you're right. I mean, they had $100 in 2024. That was their entire budget. And now they've got a $2 billion allocation from the EPA. That just seems strange to me, if nothing else. What do you make of it?
Well, it's remarkable. And, you know, the clip that you played, the Project Veritas thing that came out in December, I think it came out in the first week of December.
Yeah, I think December 4th, yeah.
At that time, the EPA had not yet finalized its memorandum of understanding with Citibank. So what they did was they took this $20 billion, of which the Power Forward Communities is $2 billion, and they moved it out of Treasury control. And the word they use is parked it at Citibank. Now that then means that you don't have any prior restrictions on the spending. The groups can just go to Citibank. They also get the interest on the $20 billion and take out whatever they want. It's not like they would call the EPA and say, we want to spend $50 million on this. And the EPA says, okay, that sounds good. And they take the money. They would just take the money. Now EPA would get statements, but they had no real oversight of it. So that was very unusual. And that's, I think, another thing that video that he's referring to is the idea that by building in these removed oversights, they can't get it back. It's already out the door. And that hadn't quite happened yet. So I think that was what he was talking about when he means about flinging off the Titanic. And now Power Forward Communities, the $2 billion wasn't even the biggest one. One group got $7 billion. Another group called the Coalition for Green Capital, it got $5 billion. And what was interesting about that was a guy named Jahi Wise left the Coalition for Green Capital and joined the Biden EPA at the end of 2022. And then in 23, I believe it was, they signed, and they may have even signed the IRA in 22. But anyway, he's at the EPA then for 23. And in April of 24, the group that he left gets $5 billion.
Wow.
And there's a lot of connections like that. We had them, we outlined some of them in our October piece with other groups. So that's just another thing that looks a little untoward. But as we said a moment ago, none of this is proven yet. It's in court right now, so we'll see.
Yeah. Well, EPA director has said, Lee Zeldin has said that he wants to claw this money back. Can he do that? Because it sounds like they've, and again, you're right, we don't know for sure, but it sounds like this thing has been designed to make that more difficult, if not impossible.
Yeah, I think Zeldin said yesterday maybe that they had clawed the money back. Now, I'm not exactly sure what's going on. Citibank wouldn't talk to me. And as far as I can tell from the Citibank hasn't done anything, right? I mean, sure, they're a bank. They'll take the 20 billion and deal with it. So I'm not exactly sure where the money is right now or how much of it is left. We spoke with a man named David Super, who's a professor of law and economics at Georgetown. He told me that he thinks there are mechanisms for clawing it back, but that it might be that the way the law is written, they would just have to give the money to somebody other than Citibank. So it's not quite clear, one, if they've got all the money back, and two, if they're going to be able to keep it. That remains to be seen.
Has any of this money been spent so far as we know?
Well, it's hard to say. The groups won't talk. At least they wouldn't talk to me. And if you go to their websites, you do see a few things that have been done. Some of it was in October and November of last year. I mentioned in the story today another group called the Appalachian Community Capital Corporation. It got $500 million. And it talks about it's going to make a $1.6 billion loan pool. See, this is all, I guess, supposed to be green banks, right? Now, that's interesting because one of the stipulations of the money was that they would attract $7 of private investment for every single dollar of federal money.
Yeah, so
500 million, 7 to 1 isn't 1.6 billion.
Yeah, so that is a feature of it, and I didn't know that, and that's in your article, so people should go read it. It's by Jim Varney. It's on the front page of RCP today. But when you say these were supposed to be green banks, basically these nonprofits were supposed to attract other funding, right, to sort of leverage the federal dollars. And according to your article, it's like $7 for every dollar that the feds put into these organizations. That's a big lift. And again, is that something that, was there a time frame in which they had to do that? Because it would seem to me that just looking at their websites, they've got a lot of work to do before they can get to a point where anyone would give them $7 for every buck that they got from the government.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And I spoke with a man named Zeeland Hoover, who used to be at the EPA in the Biden administration, and I asked him about that. Because you see, 70% of the 20 billion is supposed to be spent in low income or disadvantaged neighborhoods. Now, I don't know how much organic market there is in those neighborhoods for solar panels and more energy efficient appliances and whatnot. So I said, if there was a market for this, wouldn't the private money already be going there? And he told me that they were trying to create the market, kind of if we build it, they will come kind of model. And that's why one of the reasons that the amounts were so big. And you're right that it's supposed to be a bank and generate loans that would be repaid. But you mentioned a moment ago, Stacey Abrams, she was at the group called Rewiring America. I'm not sure that she's still with them. But anyway, they were one of the partners with Power Forward Communities. And she was on MSNBC, I think this was last week, and saying that they basically just went out and bought appliances for people. And people thought, well, are you just buying votes? I mean, are we just buying refrigerators and washers and dryers for people? So it's very kind of inchoate what's going to happen with all this money.
Yeah. So that is the question. I mean, Doge is sort of taking some credit for finding this. I guess the EPA is saying they found it. I mean, this was all public knowledge, I will say. I mean, these grants were all announced. It wasn't a big secret or anything. But it sort of has come to a head now. So again, when you look forward, we've got about a minute left here. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think it's interesting that the group that got the $7 billion just happened to draw Judge Chatkin in the District Court of Washington. Her animus towards Trump, I think, is pretty pronounced. She has told the government that she's going to give them till Monday to show that there's been some malfeasance or fraudulent actions. And if not, they supposedly have to give the money back. That's probably just the first step in it.
Wait, when you say give the money back,
back to, I guess, back to Citibank. In other words, just put the arrangement that they had back in place.
Right. So the feds have to give the money back to Citibank so that the nonprofits get the money.
Right.
Right.
I mean, I suppose they could go to Chase or something. I don't know. But
Right.
in any event, it would free up the money again for these groups to use it.
Wow.
So we'll see what happens with that next week. There's also, and I'm trying to put a story together on this now, there's another $7 billion part of this, which was they called Solar for All. That was more grants than the 8 that made up the 20 billion. And that money, for whatever reason, remained in the Treasury. And the Trump administration froze it, but some of it has gone out to some nonprofits and to states. So we're taking a look at that part also.
Wow. Jim, fascinating stuff. Thank you for bringing us up to date on this. And let's talk again after you do your next installment on this. It's such an interesting story. And it seems like every story that we talk about with the Trump administration ends up with, well, we'll see what the courts say. I mean,
Yeah.
that just seems to be the one thing that all these stories have in common. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking to Jim Varney on behalf of Carl, Tom, all of us at RCP. Thank you for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with more Real Clear Politics. Hope you'll join us then. Have a great evening.